So there's this shadow war supposedly unfolding in the Middle East, and it's pulling in global powers under this thick cloud of confusing, conflicting information. The source material we're looking at today presents a really provocative theory. It suggests that what we're all seeing happen in plain sight might not be the real story at all. So let's break down exactly what that theory is all about.
The central question this all boils down to is pretty simple. Who's really benefiting from all this chaos? The argument from our source is that the official stories just don't add up, and it puts forward a controversial idea, suggesting the real instigator here might be someone you'd least expect. Okay, so to even begin to wrap our heads around this theory, we first have to look at the battlefield itself. And what you'll see is a situation that's just filled with contradictions, puzzling events, and reports that, well, they just don't make sense.
I mean, the scale of this conflict is massive and, frankly, really lopsided. You have Iran facing over 1,000 casualties from heavy bombing in its capital, Tehran. Meanwhile, the US and Israel have reported almost no losses in comparison. The fighting has spilled out into the Indian Ocean, where the US sank an Iranian warship, and it's even pulled in NATO, which had to shoot down a missile heading for Turkey. This thing has become a global flashpoint.
And this is where the official story, according to our source, really starts to fall apart. See, Iran was blamed for a drone attack on a British base in Cyprus, an act that immediately pulled the UK into the fight. But later, it was confirmed the drone didn't even come from Iran. Same story with a huge attack on a Saudi oil facility. It was immediately blamed on Iran, but later evidence suggested they had nothing to do with it. So if Iran isn't responsible, who is?
All these head-scratching contradictions, they lead us straight to the central theory presented in our source material, what's known as the false flag hypothesis. Let's dig into what that actually means.
So, a false flag operation is, at its core, a big deception. It's when a country, or any group really, commits an attack but makes it look like someone else did it. They do it to hit a specific political or military goal. It's a pretty cynical way to manipulate both your allies and your enemies.
And that brings us right to the core allegation from our source material. It poses a very controversial question. Could Israel be the one staging these attacks on its own allies, like the UK and Saudi Arabia, and then blaming Iran? The alleged goal? To rally the entire world, especially the United States, into one united front for a full-blown war against Iran.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. That sounds pretty out there, right? A wild conspiracy theory. But the source argues that there's a historical pattern here, and it points to past incidents where Israel was allegedly caught up in very similar deceptions. So let's open the first case file, the Levant affair. Back in 1954, Israeli military intelligence recruited agents inside Egypt. Their mission? To bomb American and British civilian targets, libraries, theaters, that kind of thing. The whole point was to have Muslim groups get the blame, create a ton of instability, and convince Britain not to pull its troops out of the Suez Canal. But the plot completely fell apart. The agents were caught, and it turned into a massive political scandal for Israel.
The source material then points to a second, and maybe even more shocking incident. And it all centers on this number, over 30. That's how many American soldiers were killed in a single, incredibly controversial encounter with Israeli forces.
This was the USS Liberty incident. During the Six-Day War in 1967, Israeli jets and torpedo boats launched an attack on the USS Liberty, a U.S. Navy intelligence ship. Over 30 Americans were killed, more than 170 were wounded. Israel apologized, calling it a tragic case of mistaken identity. But our source points to declassified documents and survivor testimony that suggests the attack was actually deliberate, allegedly to stop the U.S. from spying on their military plans, and maybe even to blame Egypt for sinking the ship, to drag America deeper into the war.
Okay, so if we just go with the premise of this theory for a minute, the next big question is, why? Right? Why would Israel allegedly take such a massive risk? Well, the source lays out a strategic rationale that has a few different layers.
According to the source, the motive is really threefold. First, to take out Iran, which is seen as the last big hurdle to Israel's total dominance in the Middle East. Second, to make sure the United States is all in, militarily and politically, on that goal. And third, well, this is a much bigger, more ideological ambition, to clear the Al-Aqsa mosque site in Jerusalem, to build a prophesied third temple.
And to support that last point, the source highlights this powerful connection between geopolitics and ideology with a quote from Pete Hoekstra, a key U.S. official. The source uses this to argue that for some of the powerful figures involved here, this isn't just about politics, it's about religion, with the construction of a third temple seen as a real, achievable goal.
It's easy to look at this as just a regional conflict. But the theory presented here suggests a strategy that has massive, real-world consequences that are already hitting all of us, all around the globe.
Let's start with the price tag. The Pentagon has estimated that this war is costing American taxpayers at least $1 billion, a billion every single day. And as the war keeps dragging on, that cost is only going up, putting a huge strain on the U.S. economy.
And that kind of spending, you can bet, is causing some serious political drama in the U.S. A recent vote in the Senate to limit the president's power to keep the war going was defeated by a razor-thin margin. According to our source, this deep division shows a growing anxiety inside the American government about where this war really came from and what its true goals are. And all of this brings us to the final, and frankly, pretty unsettling question that our source material leaves us with, this false flag theory. It presents a chilling scenario. It forces you to ask, if a nation is allegedly willing to attack its own allies to get what it wants, what are the limits? In a world of that kind of alleged deception, who can you really consider an ally, and who is truly safe?